today is 1 year, exactly 1 year ago, on the 27th of February, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz gave his famous speech, Zeitenwende. Well, from some of the academics, experts, analytics, this was a transforming or turning point when it comes to the German foreign and security policy. And I would agree with that. I would support or subscribe to this analysis. But on the other hand, what we witnessed during the last 12 months is that there are still discrepancies, or there are still differences on how we here in the Baltic States and Germany perceives when it comes to the strategy, how to deal with Russia's aggression in Ukraine, when it comes to the particular deterrence and defense posture here in the Baltic States and in the eastern flank of the NATO. There are also questions whether Germany itself is homogeneous, right? Whether there are still dynamics, internal discussions, and Germany is still developing, is still transforming. That was as a starting point, and still Germany is transforming. That will have a long-lasting consequences, not only how Germany perceives itself in Europe, in Euro-Atlantic community, but also it will definitely affect also the security of Baltic states. And I would argue that recently, in the couple months, Germany has been, if I may, hot potato, right, or hot discussion in Latvian public media. We have been giving a lot of interviews. Most of the experts here sitting in this room have been trying to understand the Germany, trying to rationalize the position or the stance of the Germany. And having a close cooperation with the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, internal brainstorm, we came up with an idea. Let's do it. Let's have a frank discussion. Let's have an open discussion on understanding the Germany, what it takes to deal with the Germany. What is the Germany, after all? And therefore, sorry, and therefore I'm delighted to also welcome Oliver Morwinsky, who is head of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung in the Baltic States, for your introductory remarks, and thank you for cooperating and supporting this discussion. Please, Oliver.
Thanks, Mārtiņš, and welcome everyone. Very thankful and happy to see you all here in presence, and also all the people who are joining in and tuning in virtually. Indeed, I'm very thankful also that I'm today not the only German who has to describe and explain Germany, that we have some guests who can do this much better, especially on this topic. But indeed, Mārtiņš, as you said, for Germany, this day is quite an, let's say, historic day. 27th of February, speech of Olaf Scholz in the German Bundestag about Zeitenwende. And when we look on the speech, I would say it's a very good speech. It said everything inside what it needs to be. It's good pointed, and it's timely, very good, let's say, positioned. He's speaking about experiencing the Zeitenwende. He's promising that Germany will invest more in defense and in security, and also that Germany will take over more responsibility when it comes to the new challenges of Germany and also of Europe. But the question is, what is delivered and what is executed? Where are we after 1 year of Zeitenwende? Without a doubt, Germany is in a big political change, and we see this in different topics. When it comes to energy, for example, the decoupling from Russian gas is for a big industrial nation like Germany a big thing. Also that Germany is sending weapons into war regions, a big thing for the Green Party, for example. That Germany is investing in defense, it's a big thing for the Social Democratic Party. So there are changes ongoing, but the question is it sufficient enough to be a Zeitenwende, what the Chancellor was saying before. And this is why we are here, and as you said, Mārtiņš, we're trying to understand it a bit better, and also to discuss what is the political, let's say, view back, what happened in the last year, and what has to be done, and also from the practical point of view. What is the German army, the Bundeswehr, really capable of? Are there also over expectations maybe, or not? That's what we will see. So yeah, we're very happy that we are here today also to speak about the possible leadership role of Germany, which is often discussed and let's say demanded. And in foreign policy, it's a big new thing for Germany. Germany took leadership role, for example, when we look on the Corona crisis, also when we look back in the economic and financial crisis. Germany was a leading nation in Europe, but in foreign policy, Germany is a bit reluctant. But why is it? Why is it not? That's why we are here for. So thank you very much, you in person, and also Leah for the cooperation for this event, and thanks for the experts, Mr. Hardt from the Bundestag and Benedikt Meng for coming here directly. And without further ado, Mārtiņš, please enlighten us and let the guests enlighten us.
Thank you. Thank you, Oliver. I think we can leave it here. So we will discuss, we will kick off the discussion, and I will introduce my, or our panelists today. First of all, joining us online, Jürgen Hardt, a German politician of the Christian Democrat Union, who has served as a member of the Bundestag. Mr. Hardt, hopefully you hear us loud and clear. Oh, we don't use?
I have to unmute. Sorry. Now you can hear me, I think.
Perfect.
I have a perfect picture of the conference, and therefore all is fine.
Thank you. Thank you a lot for joining us online. And in person, Benedikt Meng, who is advisor for security and defense policy, member of the Young Foreign Policy Experts at Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Hardt, I would like to start with you. And first of all, with introductory remarks for both of you, 5 to 7 minutes, if I may. Do you perceive Zeitenwende speech as really a historic turning point, or as some of the scholars arguing that we are experiencing continuation of the German policy for the last decades? What is your reading? What is your perception of the Zeitenwende?
First, I would like to mention, as foreign affairs spokesperson of the CDU-CSU, I'm closely looking on that what the government is doing, but I'm in the opposite. The CDU-CSU in Germany is, for a short period of time, I would like to say, in the role of leading the opposite. When the Bundestag was asked to go for a special meeting on Sunday, the 27th of February last year, we all expected an interesting speech of the Chancellor. And as we have learned, he didn't communicate significant parts of its speech, from the social democratic point of view, most critical points to its own group in the Deutsche Bundestag. And therefore, he gave that speech with 100 billion extra for defense, 100 billion euros extra for defense, with 2% from now on. All the messages we as CDU-CSU applaud very lot for, because we fought for more money for the Bundeswehr and we fought for reaching the 2%, even in the coalition with the Social Democrats from 2018 on. But the reaction in his own camp, especially in the Social Democratic camp, was very weak. The applause for that speech of the Chancellor was much bigger in CDU-CSU, and to be frank, also with the Liberals, as it was with the Greens and the Social Democrats. And we gave an answer that we would like to support this way in its fundamental pillars, which is 100 billion extra for Bundeswehr and 2% and weapons for Ukraine. These are, so to say, the three main points. But over the months, we saw that government is not executing as expected. I start with the 2%. He announced 2% up sofort from now on. I fear that looking back to the figures of 22, I have not yet the final figures of the expenditures of the state for 22, the, so to say, the Abrechnung, the final sum of the budget 22. But I fear that in 22 Germany is concerning GDP share for defense lower than we were 2021 when we reached close to 1.5%, and also in 2020, which was responsibility of Ursula von der Leyen and then Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer. The second is that we decided to change the constitution to make it possible to have this 100 billion Sondervermögen extra budget for defense expenditures, but we didn't see any order out of that 100 billion budget. We now have learned that the plan to buy the F-35 aircraft to replace the Tornado from that money, but there's not yet a treaty or a decision of the budget committee of the Bundestag to spend some of that money. And looking to that, what is urgent in Germany, ammunition, not only for delivering to Ukraine, but also for strengthening the Bundeswehr, a replacement of those 14 Panzerhaubitze 2000 that we gave to Ukraine. We normally would expect that German Bundeswehr should be replaced, those 14 cannons by buying new. There is no decision on that. And the third is that even with the question of delivering of weapons, it took a long time to decide on heavy weapons. The Bundestag agreed on a resolution end of April last year that we will send heavy weapons. That means also infantry tanks and heavy tanks. The government didn't decide that. The decision came 3 weeks ago, and as you know, it will take a long time to train Ukrainian soldiers and to fit up the existing used tanks in the German Rüstungsindustrie, in the armament industry. They have some old material on the stock that can be modernized, but this needs several weeks, if not months, to do that. So several things that Chancellor Scholz proposed to do are not fulfilled. And my huge concern is that this is something that weakens the German standing in the NATO and European Union community. And to give the fourth and last example for that, German government announced to send additional soldiers to Rukla, to Lithuania, up to going up from the battalion up to a brigade, and looking to the real capabilities of the Bundeswehr at the moment. We see weaknesses, and I fear that this proposal of the German government towards people in the Baltic States and towards the people and the government in Lithuania cannot be fulfilled as soon as expected. And therefore, I think we have a huge damage of trust in Germany due to those four significant points. But to be frank, I think the Chancellor is judging on the mind and mood of its voters in Germany and looking to them. I think he is not unpopular with doing such a the way on the break. He is the people. Some of people like Christian Democrats, we in the parliament, and also a lot of our voters and people in my constituency talking to me, they will not accept this way of the Chancellor. But there's a minimum 50% in Germany with the population that agrees on doing slower than announced and doing slower than maybe expected from NATO or other partners. And this is where we sit in between. And the reason for the German reluctance to deliver weapons to Ukraine, to invest more in Bundeswehr and is also coming out of the situation that people are not able to judge really on what is right and what is wrong. They potentially need leadership in that question, and normally the leadership has to come from the Chancellor. In such a difficult situation we are now, and we miss that leadership, and therefore also the mind and mood in the German public is such ambivalent as I explained. We work hard to come to overcome that situation. Hopefully, we are not too late with more weapons for Ukraine, because I think Russia used the last 3 months, 4 months better than, so to say, the Western world, and Ukraine. Ukraine cannot do it by itself. They need weapons and ammunition from us. And I hope that we are not too late, because we cannot, we will not have to see a game change in Ukraine with success of Russia, which would be a huge risk for us all, and brings us closer to direct confrontation with Russia than it is now, where Ukraine is doing a hard and good job for us all in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hardt, for your introductory remarks. If I may follow up immediately, just briefly, I know this is not an easy question or not briefly answered question, but from your perspective, what I'm hearing and understanding your point, that is the change of the policy, but not the change of the mindset. Am I right? Still, we are missing the change of the mindset that was perceived here in the Baltic States, hearing the Olaf Scholz. We are still seeing that the mindset is still, the change of the mind, the transformation is still in the process. Am I right?
I have no other explanation, for the reason that German government is not using the 100 billion euros for equipping Bundeswehr, not increasing defense budget up to 2%, not delivering more heavy weapons to Ukraine. Instead of that, the German government is not, or the chancellor is not willing to do that, because he is afraid of losing support in the German public, afraid of having a closer or more direct confrontation with Russia. I don't know. He is a book with 7 seals. He is not a good communicator. Even his party colleagues and supporters see him weak on the field of communication, and therefore we can only miracle around, wonder around what the reasons might be. But looking to the concrete politics, I have to state, and this is difficult for me because I don't want to blame Germany, but I have to state that the Zeitenwende speech was a good speech, but the execution was very weak. And as I explained, in those 3 main fields, and also looking to the what government said towards Lithuania, I think there's a big gap between lip service and concrete action. And this is a problem for Germany and a problem for Ukraine and us all.
Thank you. We'll touch upon definitely to some of the issues that you pointed out. Benedikt, I read an article soon after the Zeitenwende on The Guardian saying that this is 180-degree change of the course for the Germany. I think that Patrick Winter was the author of this article, naming that, well, that will definitely change the European security in mid and long-term perspective. What's your reading on year after the Zeitenwende, where we are? What is the Germany?
Well, first of all, Mārtiņš and Oliver, thank you for having me here back in Riga. It's always great to be here. It's always great to be in the Baltic States when talking about security and defense policy, because I feel very much understood in many ways. But Zeitenwende, is it a 180-degree turn? I don't know, but I think in Germany you can look at it this way. But before getting into all the negative aspects about Zeitenwende, yes. I'd like to always acknowledge, from an internal perspective, within like the German security bubble, I have to acknowledge what a tremendous change it is. So when I think back 1 year, the discussions we were having before February 24th and the discussions we're having now, I think this might not be enough, and I know from the outside this looks that it is not enough. But I can tell you from the inside, looking at it with a German lens, it is tremendous what we're discussing. So that also is connected to, you mentioned the mindset. I think not all areas of society, but especially in civil society, where the government is under-delivering, I see in some parts of the society a tremendous change. Is it enough? Perhaps not. But at least relatively, we see good progress. Absolute is not enough. When I also like to keep in mind that Zeitenwende was imposed on Germany. It was not a choice. So when you analyze German policy, you always have to think that the government moves, they are reactive. And we're running behind in many ways because it was not a choice. It was imposed on the German government. But when I think about Zeitenwende, of course, because I come from the security and defense field, I'd like to focus on that area. And when doing so, in the analysis, I focus on three key areas. That's the strategic level, and the operational level second, also we could call it the military level, and then the industrial layer, the procurement perspective. And I think these are the three key areas you need to look at when you talk about that. And taking up the strategic level, let's take the term strategy. I am convinced that in the German political system, policy-making system, we have an inherent strategy-making deficit. We call a lot of things strategy, but from my perspective, it's not really a strategy, because strategy means prioritizing some things and deprioritizing other things. It means deciding what you're going to do, but it also means deciding what you're not going to do. In Germany, we always like to do everything or nothing. We're kind of in between. Strategy needs goals, and they need to be specific and quantifiable. If you look in our strategy documents, often you won't see anything quantifiable. We call those goals SMART. They need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. That's the methodology approach to that. And I understand that sometimes being vague is from a political view, can be an advantage, but from the policy-making view, I would not go down that road. Too often, also strategies in Germany are just a collection of initiatives. You can look at our digital strategy, for example, at the moment. It's just a collection. I'm sorry, but that's not a strategy. So I think when we talk about the strategic level in defense policy making and the Zeitenwende and where we need to go, we need to talk about that change. We need to get engaged in real strategy making. And we also need, with that strategy making, organizational structure change, and also the change of the procedures of the process organization. And that also leads to one of the really ground zero discussions. There are good reasons for it, but the forced division in Germany between internal and external security, which is, after all, in that whole how we perceive defense policy in the future, is a big stone in the way. Coming to the operational level, the military perspective, the government has vowed to make the Bundeswehr one, if not the most powerful army in Europe, and we have not seen that change yet. However, of course, that change is not going to be there so fast. With the last Minister of Defense, Lambrecht, we didn't succeed in many ways. Now with the new defense minister, I hear a lot of good things on the communication level. It sounds like we're going into the right direction. Of course, he's in office for a couple of days, and we need to see if he can deliver and the government can deliver. But if we look at the armed forces, we see that they are under a lot of stress. There are new tasks, new assignments since the Madrid summit, for example, enhanced vigilant activities in the brigade forward command element in Lithuania, Slovakia, more air policing. This year starting, we're now doing NATO VJTF lead again. So more assignments, more tasks, but the resources have more or less stayed the same. And politics needs to follow up with that. And we're also training Ukrainian brigade equivalent elements. So there's a lot of things on the plate for the Bundeswehr, and more to come. The NATO new force model, for example, in the future will require more commitment from the Bundeswehr in terms of readiness and more deployable troops. One mechanized division that's like 16,000 additional soldiers and airplanes and Navy vessels. So there's a lot more to come, and politics needs to counter all the shortcomings that the Bundeswehr still has. The two main areas are basically personnel. We have a future overhead count of 203,000 soldiers, but we're somewhere hovering around 183, 184,000 right now. And when I still worked for the in-house consulting of the German Ministry of Defense, one of my last projects was actually the HR strategy. And I can tell you, it's hard. You can say just 20,000 people, but you need to close that gap. And also then on the technical side, you have the readiness issue, how to tackle that. And then, of course, back to the organization part. I am convinced that how the Ministry of Defense, for example, is organized is not fit for future anymore. We got rid of something called the planning staff that was there until 2011. Now it is organized like a typical ministry, but that is not fit for the purpose. And also the Bundeswehr probably needs some adjustments. And then we move on to the industrial layer. And I think this is really where a lot of the discussion is, the famous 100 billion special budget. You have to see that this is just enough to fulfill our capability requirements that we set ourselves in 2018. So what we can do with that is almost fulfilling that, because now inflation is kicking in. We're probably down to 85 billion, and that is just not enough. And if you take the voices from politics, the Armed Forces Commissioner Eva Högel, actually from the Social Democratic Party, so from the Chancellor's party, said perhaps we need 300 billion. The army chief said it's not enough. The National Armament Director, Admiral Stavitsky, said it's not enough. So we need to do more. We just briefly touched upon the issue. Ammunition is not in the budget, so we can go into details what's wrong with that. We already touched upon the 2%. Defense budget in this year, 2023, is actually going down compared to last year, 300 million. It's not a lot, but it's going down. If we take in the special budget, we're probably able to balance it over 2 years, then we will get over the 2%. But after that, after the special budget is gone, then we have to actually increase our defense budget the regular way. So we also expect that the NATO target for the 2% will probably be raised in Vilnius this summer. So what we're going to do with that? And at the same time, Germany has really neglected its arms industry. Over years, the production capacity went down. It's really hard for some of the arms corporations to get capital at the market. So there are new ESG requirements, which makes it really hard to get capital at the financial markets. And there need to be incentives and insurances that the government will cooperate. We were kind of moving from an unwanted stepchild relationship, that's the past, and we need to get it more into a national security interest relationship, national security asset. And that also requires, of course, more European cooperation. And if you sum this all up, and I will stop here, I mean, if you take this over the different dimensions, strategic level, operational and industrial level, it just means that we need more capacity in strategy making. We need to, as I elaborated, we need to do more strategy making the right way, and we need more capabilities to assess, to decide, but also to act. Sounds very easy, of course it's not. And yeah, happy to discuss further.
Yeah, thank you, Benedikt. First of all, thank you for your thought-provoking ideas when it comes to the 2% and how much Germany is spending. Well, I'm not advocate of Germany, but I have to say, and I appreciate also what Germany has done also here in the Baltic States, right? You mentioned, and this is rightly so, highly appreciated also from the Latvia's perspective, is that Germany is the framework nation of the Lithuanian battalion that will be transformed into brigade, right? Germany is participating in Baltic air policing. Germany is has been part of military exercises and also investing in our military industry. So Germany has been active, but taking into account that Germany is kind of a superpower, the perception of, at least from the Baltic perspective, is that Germany has to play a leading role. You were mentioning about the strategies. Has Russia's aggression, and particularly 24th of February, changed also the perception of political elite and as well as society when it comes to how to deal with the Putin? I mean, you know, this discussion before the conflict, or before the Russia entered into Ukraine and before the large-scale conventional war. On 14th of February, Scholz was in Moscow speaking with Putin. That was perceived from the Baltic perspective as a show of weakness. Someone would argue that it's a show of strength, that we can speak and we have to say something. How this has changed, I mean, how the perception, how to deal with the Putin's Russia or Russia's Putin has changed.
I mean, it's a great question, because I think the answer is probably, in that sense, Germany is not united. Just coming from Berlin, where a couple of days ago we saw a big demonstration, although they said it was bigger than in the end it was. A politician from the left party and a former activist, feminist activist, they both came together and did a peace demonstration. I would say it was more like a Russian propaganda talking points demonstration. And it kind of catches a sentiment that you find in some parts of the society. So has the German society changed on the whole? No. I think the majority, yes. Especially when you look at the political elites, you can always ask the question, did they see it coming? I think if you are deep down in the defense policy area and or you deal with military things, perhaps you overestimate how clear it was if you're not dealing with that on a daily basis. But I think what we can see, and what is quite tremendous, is that we're getting rid of the idea, the German idea, changing through trade, and that is one of the fundamental ideas that was the idea of many German governments of all colors, that we can change Russia by just keeping them close, trading, that Germany has kind of the secret key to that. I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this has changed, and I think this is probably the biggest change. And also in civil society, when I talk to peers, especially from the Green Party, for example, discussion here has changed a lot, especially when it comes to defense policy and the stance of defense. When prominent politicians of the Green, Anton Hofreiter, are talking about tanks in a way I would have never believed that, because the Green Party, especially those people from the Green Party, come from a more, not pacifist, but more peace politics oriented corner of the room, and are not the classic foreign policy hawks. So I would say there's a lot of change, but I think you cannot say that the German society has changed on a whole, because there's still layers that are working on it.
Yeah, exactly, and there are a lot of polls showing that there is reluctance from the German society as well to provide more and more military aid when it comes to the Ukraine. Just one reminder, you see in your slides, and those who are joining us online, there is a Slido QR code that you can use for the questions, and I will receive them in my smartphone, and I will ask for the panelists. But coming back to you, Hardt, before I open the Q&A for the in-person attendees, someone argues that there is a kind of a Scholzianism in German policy, meaning that this is Olaf Scholz personal policy when it comes to the Russia itself, when it comes to the Putin, trying to find, as previously noted, win-win situation, excluding any kind of zero-sum game. Whether it's Olaf Scholz himself, how, or put it in different words, is the political elite homogeneous? I mean, is there unity and solidarity when it comes to how to deal with the Germany, how to deal with the Russia?
Yes, I think this is really a time change, that our eyes are now more open on the reality in Russia as it was before, and change through trade might be not a wrong concept, but you need a plan B that works instead, that it does not work. And I would like to say, in case that we would be more strong in the Western world, and maybe more robust on 2014, when Russia attacks Ukraine by occupying the Crimea and occupying parts of eastern Ukraine. Maybe we never came came to that point where we are now. I raised my hand because I want to add something on the remarks of Benedikt and also of you, Mārtiņš, on strategy. Yes, we have a lack of strategy in Germany, but the reason for that is not that we would not be able to define strategies from the intellectual point of view. Every idea is already thought in Germany, but the risk or the reason why we don't have written strategies on several important points, or written strategies but without content, is that everybody knows about the result of the strategies and don't want to follow the results, and therefore they are reluctant to make strategies. I give you an example. Yeah, we have no energy security strategy in Europe because everybody knew about that in case that we define such an energy security independence strategy for European energy, the result would have been clearly not to take so much gas from Russia. And especially Germany, especially the social democratic camp and the German government didn't want to reduce gas from Russia, and therefore they didn't want to have a strategy on energy security because they know the outcome. And this is always the discussion. We have not a lack in intellectual competence to define strategies. We have, so to say, more a risk or more a reluctant behavior of politicians that they expect results of strategies they don't want to follow, and therefore they don't want to have those strategies. And this is where we are in Germany now, and this shows that our intellectual society and political society is not close behind. I think there's a huge number of people, even in politics, that hopes that once a day, when Ukraine crisis is solved in one or the other way, we might come back to more relaxed relations to Russia. I can tell you from my point of view, even if Mother Teresa might become president of Russia, Germany should never take as much gas from Russia as we did up to February last year. And therefore we don't have consensus in Germany about what might be the long-lasting results of that confrontation we have now. A significant number of people expect that this is only a thunderstorm, and after that thunderstorm, there is nuclear air for dialogue and maybe trade and change through trade and other things that it was as it was before, or we expected or hoped that it was before. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you. This is also, I think, one of the main differences between the German and Baltic perspective as we perceive Russia. I mean, from our perspective, it's even after the Vladimir Putinism will not disappear. I mean, whether it's, well, we don't know who would be the next one, but definitely the ideology and norms and values that are present right now in Russia will be there. So this will be the challenge. It is a long-term challenge from our perspective. With this, I'm opening the floor for also in-person attendees. So raise your hand, introduce yourself. Oh, a lot of questions. Okay, let's start with Atis and then Irina and yeah, you have a microphone. It is coming.
I'm Stradiņš, and I'm former director of the institute. I used to be a politician, but I'm retired now. Two questions, actually both to you, but especially to Mr. Hardt. Isn't the security strategy to be ready in a week or two? You're working on it in the Bundestag. We know, we're expecting it. And you're saying, no, you have to wait longer than a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So what's happening? Where is it now? And the other thing is, yes, maybe under Lambrecht, you could say, mention all these shortcomings. But there was an article today in Politico Europe also outlining the shortcomings. It's not a Zeitenwende, it's a Zeitensham. It's not really happening. Imagine, Politico Europe. But I think it's changed with Pistorius. Please back me up. Because Lambrecht, yes, But Pistorius, you mentioned it. Your name was Meng, yes, Mr. Meng. Under Pistorius, at least communication is different, but I feel that there is more, because I read German and I follow very closely what's happening in Germany. There's even going to be a major maneuver, war game in Poland with American and Polish troops and German troops. Now that's a big step forward.
Okay. If I may, maybe on this occasion, the first question for you, Mr. Hardt, and then the second one for you, Benedikt.
I try to give a short answer. I'm not a member of the government coalition, but I've learned that the process of national strategy, the security strategy, is now postponed up to April. We expected that the coalition decided in the coalition treaty they wrote within a year. The year is already over a long time. We expected to have it on the Munich Security Conference. It was not. We expected to have it this week. This week there will be the presentation of the feminine foreign policy strategy of the government, of the Foreign Office. And I expect to have the national security strategy in April. And maybe the answers will not be as sufficient as you, especially in the Baltics or other NATO partners, expect. But this is only looking into a glass bowl. I'm not sure, and I will not criticize the strategy that is not yet on the table.
Thank you.
Yeah, with regard to Pistorius, of course you're right. He has all the things on the table to succeed, obviously, but only time will tell. I mean, now it's only on the communicational level and he's actually making a great job. I'll totally give him that, and also. And I think that's the fundamental difference to his predecessor. He also does not come from the security and defense field, but he seems to at least listen to the right advisors, or he's actually up to speed quite fast, which is a good sign. And I hope that this will be a good thing for German security and defense policy in the future. And I think that's also where the link is probably to the national security strategy. From what I know, there is some sort of disconnect between the Foreign Office and the Chancellery, and perhaps we'll also see, I mean, Pistorius being a Minister of Defense, he's also dependent on what's happening in the Chancellery. So what can happen to the NSS can also happen to anything that's coming out of the Ministry of Defense. So we will see how that plays out. The whole national security strategy thing is not a good PR stunt. I mean, it should have been ready by the Munich Security Conference last week. It wasn't. Everyone knows about it. The dispute is quite open. So, from a strategic communications perspective, this is really not the best operation. And in terms of you talked about that maneuver. Yes, that is important, and it's great that we're doing that. But in the end, it's simply not enough, because German defense policy needs more than just. And I don't want to undervalue a maneuver like that. I know that the signaling, but it needs structural change in many areas, and it shouldn't just be more of the same, but with more money. And also, as we just heard, the more money is very limited. So I'm waiting for more.
Great, Irina, please.
Irina Kuznetsova, a civic activist. I have a question to Benedikt, basically two questions. And the first, you've mentioned a lot and quite many times that we are not doing enough in terms of defense spending. And then I have a question, so who is dragging the feet? I mean, the government, a specific political group or a political party, or maybe the Chancellor himself, closely watching the public opinion? And who should really take an action in this regard? And the second, about war fatigue. Should we really be afraid about war fatigue spreading among German population in the foreseeable future?
Okay, let's take another one. Imans, please.
Hi, Iman Sliages, former Minister of Defence and former Ambassador, and now a researcher at the Foreign Policy Institute. Thanks very much for your presentations. One comment and then a couple of questions. The comment is I was quite shocked to read recently that Germany, in benefiting from the peace dividend, has reduced the number of battle tanks post 1991 from 5,000 in the 1990s to 320 today. So that was my comment. I mean, you have touched on the need to build up the Bundeswehr, and obviously that's an issue. Leading on to that, relations with Russia. I get the sense that Russia tends to manipulate relations with Germany by always referring to and making Germany feel guilty for its role in the Second World War. Do you see politicians and society sort of moving away from that guilt aspect and you know, being able to take on, because I think that's linked into the leadership role of Germany in some ways. It seems to be hindering it. Is there any movement away from this sort of constant feeling of guilt for the Second World War? And then the second question, in trying to understand Germany and what's happening within Europe, how has the reaction to Zeitenwende been in with your most important partner in the European Union, that's France? You know, can you give us some sort of sense of how things are moving in the very important motor, in inverted commas, relations of Germany and France? Thank you.
Okay, maybe you start, Benedikt, and then Mr. Hardt.
Okay,
something.
So I'll start with you, who's writing the strategies. Of course, I mean that's the government's job. The process, how it works in the German ministerial bureaucracy, is very much relying on branches. So we have every ministry has a director generals. The main work is done by the branches. You can call this like a deficit by structure. So they are doing the main work, and then of course this is the strategy can be prepared bottom up, but it needs to be executed bottom down. And often that is then where the problem is, because there's different political ideas and disputes out there. War fatigue. Yes, I mean, I think there is the possibility that some parts of the society actually get something like war fatigue. My answer to that would be that we need to start doing more strategic communication measures. So perhaps let's talk about training Ukrainian soldiers. What does that mean? And do media campaigns, for example. It's always nice to talk about something you call the unswipeable content. So nothing you can just swipe away on your phone. How about some billboards or something? A positive campaign about what this contribution means for not only the security in Ukraine, but also the security in Europe on a broader level. Moving on the battle tanks, yes. I mean, of course, going from 2,000s or thousands of battle tanks to and reducing them, you can argue for that. However, I mean, so I remember when I joined the armed forces, and there's others here who can probably like have a better view on that. Everything we did and trained for was international crisis management. So out of area operations, very light forces. The classical combined warfare with tanks was not the main emphasis. And I'm an Army Reserve officer, so yeah, that's how it was. So we're changing that since 2014, slowly, steadily. It's changing now, and I have the feeling since, especially since February 24th last year, a lot has changed. And actually, that's also where I want to say that's actually a great thing that our armed forces are doing. They're doing that on their own. How they're training their own soldiers, how they're actually talking about war again. That what you need to have to sustain such a situation, that you're talking about victory in a conflict. So the narrative is really changing there, and I see that as a positive thing for the armed forces. The guilt aspect, I wouldn't call it guilt, it's more responsibility. Is that I know that, yes, the Russian narrative sometimes plays with that, but I think you can turn it around and exactly make a case why Germany should be engaged for Ukraine, for the security in Europe, out of that historical responsibility, to not make mistakes of the past again, and play a leading role for a free and united Europe. And therefore, when you turn it around, and I would like to call it a more responsibility and less guilt, and then also the whole narrative makes more sense to me. And France, yeah, I mean, France, sometimes I mean, the relationship is when it comes to defense policy interesting sometimes, and now, with the, and this was without without saying it's positive or negative, but now with NATO being back at the forefront of defense policy and underlining that role, the ideas that we had in 2018 about strategic autonomy, I think this discussion is now changing. I know that some people in Paris don't like the way that this is going, and also German initiatives that are now coming. Let's talk about the European Sky Shield initiative, an initiative about air defense. There was a comment at the Munich Security Conference from the French side saying actually we should talk about air defense. The French approach to air defense, I understood that as a little answer to that initiative. So I think there are discussions that we need to have between allies. I would, and I'm not a French defense foreign policy expert, but I would like to understand more what actually the February 24th did to policy discussions in France. Actually, that's something I can't talk about, but that would interest me tremendously.
Good point. Iman's mentioned partner. I would disagree with this slightly. But Mr. Hardt, please, anything from your side on guilt, France, or war fatigue?
Yeah, I would start with France. When we were in Paris, a delegation of the Deutsche Bundestag to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Elizabetes Treaty, the friendship treaty between Germany and France, there were the two speeches of President Macron and Chancellor Scholz. And President Macron mentioned to the address of Olaf Scholz, this was my impression, we will not only be judged for that what we are doing, we will also be judged for that what we are not doing. And having in mind that normally the German government never criticized French government in public and vice versa, it was a clear message to Olaf Scholz to do more for the common security issues from my point of view. And maybe it was especially also the French position on German tanks for Ukraine. The second point concerning so to say, the Russian complex, maybe Germans should have, the German-Russian history is very long and experienced. And I think there's a common consensus that conflict with Russia cannot be solved militarily. I think this is also a consensus in Germany that we should avoid any direct military confrontation with Russia. But having in mind that it was not Europe or Ukraine or Germany that started the war against Ukraine, but Russia, it's a wrong decision that some people take in Germany to say if there's a military confrontation, we should not react militarily, but diplomatic-wise. And this was the mind and mood on the street in Berlin from those 13,000 protesters. I think they are not a majority. I would like to say in Germany, maybe 2/3 are in favor of more support for Ukraine, 1/3 are in favor of not sponsoring the war, but going a diplomatic way, however it should be. But looking to the people that had been on the street on last, was it Saturday? I think it was Saturday, last Saturday here in Berlin. My wife was here and she told me about that probably most of the protesters were coming out of the old socialistic elite of the GDR, those people that were educated in the Soviet Union. And for them, Soviet Union was, so to say, the role model for the best and biggest ever. And it's a miracle that those who were in favor of the socialistic, communistic leadership of the Soviet Union are now in favor of this kleptocratic, highly corrupt Russian president who changed Russia from a socialistic or social welfare state into a pure capitalism state. but they are in favor of Russia, and they will never give that up. And also on the right side, demonstrators are on the side of those old communists that are appreciating the fascistic behavior of Putin, which is in some ways similar to that what we saw in the last century from fascists. Therefore, there's a huge question behind the homogeneity of those who are against more engagement in Ukraine and against showing a strong answer to that what Russia does, and therefore not only the non-support Ukraine camp is not only the supporters of Ukraine are not homogeneous, but also the non-supporters of Ukraine and of that politics now are not homogeneous. And the lines are going directly through political camps in Germany. And last point I would like to mention, looking to the equipment of the Bundeswehr, we should not miss to have in mind that under Ursula von der Leyen and Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, the defense budget in Germany was increased from 33 billion euros up to 55 billion euros. This was a significant increase, double-digit increase year by year. It was not enough, but by the way, the number of tanks in the German Bundeswehr was increased by from 250 up to 320 now, which is not enough, but significant more than it was before. We were weaker, much weaker in the Bundeswehr some years ago as we are now. And unfortunately, I have sometimes the feeling that also the German government, who don't want to step in with more engagement in some fields, maybe in the Baltics or in Mali, to give an example, or to support Ukraine stronger, they sometimes use that also as an potential, as an Ausrede, an exclusion for not doing more because the Bundeswehr is so weak. I think some people in the government camp have no problem with the reason that the Bundeswehr is too weak because they have an argument towards others not to do more. I think the truth maybe is in between.
Thank you. Let's take a last round of questions too here, please.
Hello, Eric McPherson from the Embassy of Spain, though I'm representing more myself than the institution here. The big question I sort of have is about the feasibility of all the measures I've been hearing about here. I'm especially interested about this aspect that Mārtiņš has mentioned, this policy versus mentality, a mentality change. But I do kind of have the impression that mentality is usually a result of the self-perception, and with the new data we have from the German Statistical Office that indicates that the last 3 months of 2022 the German economy shrank by 0.4%, and with this fear of recession or of an economic crisis, how feasible is it to think that certain policies are going to be able to be conducted, in the sense also that because of public opinion as well, whether we like or not what the policies towards Russia that Angela Merkel did, which I personally do not like. It is true, however, that because she stayed for 15 years in power, this whole idea of foreign policy as a state policy was kind of well grounded. However, there is this certain lingering idea that Olaf Scholz is not going to really be able to have a second term, and he's only going to last 4 years. So this idea of how could maybe these certain policies be linked to the political figure of Olaf Scholz, and how risky is it if Olaf Scholz's figure is in danger of disappearing in the further 2-3 years to come? How can that affect everything?
Okay, thank you. And here, please, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Hamid Lajavardi. I appreciate your comments, especially addressing all the critical issues that we're all faced with. I read Chancellor Scholz's speech on Financial Times. I was very happy to hear what he had to say. But all the things that I want to ask you have already, the issues have been raised, but I want to raise them in a maybe different manner. Germany has been known since the last 70 years as a great export machine. Given the productivity of the German labor, given the cheap energy from Russia, given the cheap euro, and finally underspending in the defense area. In that context, the tanks were mentioned as how they have drastically been reduced, but the last time I looked at, I understand of the 6 submarines that the German Navy has, none of them are operational. In their Air Force, I understand only 10% of them are operational. So it's a fundamental issue, systematic issue.
Question, please.
Yes. The question will come.
We're a bit running out of the time.
Fair enough. The question comes down to, are these changes that Schulz talked about, are they sustainable in the long run? Is this just a putting your feet into the water, or are the Germans going to dive in wholeheartedly according to what Chancellor Schulz wrote in his speech, which was reprinted in Financial Times? Finally, about the Russian lobby. Now that has been raised. My history professor said there's a love-hate relation between the Germans and the Russians. Is this going to go away, or is this going to be a long-term process where once the Ukraine war is over, it will raise its head again? Those are the issues I'd like you to give specific answers to. Thank you.
Thank you very much for both of you, and I would like to add my question, the last one. You know, there are now a lot of conferences when representatives from the Baltic States are participating and starting their introductory remarks. We told you so. We told you so, and we were right? And it comes also for the selling our interests and ideas also to the Germany. Help us, gentlemen, how to sell our ideas to the Germany, how to ensure that our interests are heard very well in Bundestag or in other corridors of the German foreign and security policy. Please, the floor is yours. Hardt, please, maybe we can start with you, Mr. Hardt.
I try to give a quick answer. First, having dialogue between the civil society and governments in Baltic States and Germany is of huge importance. And on the Munich Security Conference, I had a meeting with Foreign Minister Landsbergis from Lithuania, with President Kallas from Estonia. We listen carefully. We as Christian Democrats listen carefully, and I'm sure that also my colleagues from the Greens, the Liberals, and the Social Democrats do so. Second, concerning Bundeswehr, I think one of the biggest problems we have in Bundeswehr is the procurement process. The process how Bundeswehr decides which material should be bought and who should build it, and. And I think this is one of the biggest tasks of Pistorius. The new defense minister, I trust in him. I also see a huge change for the Bundeswehr with this defense minister, to be frank. He's not from a party, but he is totally different to that what Madam Lambrecht delivered to us. And I think to modify and maybe to revolution the procurement process of the Bundeswehr is one of the biggest tasks we have. By the way, just to mention, the situation was never in the Bundeswehr that none of the 6 submarines were able to go. This is always, nobody knows what about our submarines because it's a secret and should be a secret. To be frank, if you have 6 submarines, you have those 6 to have 2 in operation permanently, because the other from out of 3, 1 is maybe under modernization or in the shipyard for renovation. The second is used for training of the crew up to the highest level, and the third is in action. And if you have 6 submarines, you plan to have 2 in the concrete 100% capability with 100% capabilities in service, and this is too less. We order new submarines for the Deutsche Bundeswehr, but it is not, as some people argued, that there was no submarine in Germany underway, or only 10% of aircraft. We have a huge lack in spare parts, because spare parts are very expensive, and the package of spare parts for medical military equipment is sometimes up to 70% of the total price of that military system. And due to financial reasons, and due to the peace that was outbroken in Europe in the 90s and beginning of the 21st century, a lot of people say we can order spare parts if we need them. We have not to hold them on stock, because otherwise we have to throw it away. And this was also a big mistake. And this was the reason why sometimes repairment in German Bundeswehr takes longer than under normal circumstances. This is a second field where the new defense minister has to do hard work.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much.
Concluding remarks for you, Benedikt.
Yeah. So with respect to the budget, and yes, you can only spend budget once. So this morning, I think when I was driving to the airport, I listened to an interview that the Minister of Labor, Hubertus Heil, was asked about the Bundeswehr budget. And of course, these are the 2 main budgets in the German household that are competing. I don't like that term, but in the end you can see it that way, and you can only spend money once, and that's why you need to make a good case. And the problem with defense policy is everything you do works out. You buy those tanks and you will never use them, and try selling that to the population really hard. Don't have a recipe for that, but I think it comes down to that question, to find a narrative doing that. Defense is successful if you don't have to use it, or you successfully defend yourself. But this is, of course, really hard, especially now. Everyone has experienced it. You go home, you get your new gas bill. It's really hard. And then if you work in that field, it's hard. I can explain to myself why this makes sense, but it is really hard to tell that to someone in Berlin on the street, and they're probably fighting for their existence. Yes, I don't have a patent recipe for that. With the readiness discussion, that is a favorite German media debate about readiness, and every once in a while we have an article about our planes not flying, submarines not a thing. Readiness in military terms is really difficult, how the readiness levels are calculated, and just because an airplane is not operational in that sense doesn't mean it's like in parts on the ground. So you have to. It always sounds very devastating when you read it in the media, and I would like to see some more differentiation when talking about that topic, because it is actually very, very difficult. And also, Jürgen Hardt perfectly explained it. There's always someone in maintenance. I think I've never seen that all American aircraft carriers are out at sea. It doesn't work like that. Same is on a much smaller scale in the German army. It's a lot of technical stuff after all. And Jürgen had also mentioned the thing logistics and also ammunition. If I can put up a wish list for the military, I would like the debate to be more about logistics, spare parts, and ammunition. Also, when we talk about Ukraine and assistance to Ukraine, everyone always in Germany loves talking about tanks this, tanks that. I don't think it makes sense on that level. You need to, because it's combined arms warfare, you need to see it as a whole. It's a system. It's not a tank that will bring the change. It's the whole operational, the maneuver warfare that brings change. But what is decisive is ammunition. We've seen weeks in the summer where the Russians and the Ukrainians, they shot between 60 and 80,000 artillery grenades per week. That's a lot. The German, and it's a very big company, a German company, Rheinmetall, is able to manufacture 80,000 artillery grenades per year. And that's the level we're talking about. We're shooting very simple ammunition, World War I style, but we're not able with a production capacity to reproduce it. And I think the discussion should be more about that and less about Leopard 1, Leopard 2. And about how can we bring the Baltic narrative to Germany. I think Germany has been at the forefront of defense during the Cold War, and Germany benefited a lot during that time from its allies because it got all the backing and all the military forces stationed there. And I think the key, perhaps not the only key, but it could be worthwhile to try setting up a narrative that now this line has shifted. It has shifted to the east. You can talk about, is it Ukraine? It's also the Baltics. That doesn't mean we're not, the threat perception perhaps in Germany has changed, but we need to talk about that. And that also means that back then when we received help and support and defense support from our allies, that now it's up to us to give that support to our allies in the Baltics, but also to our partners and friends in Ukraine. And that must not be the only way to approach it, but that would be my go.
Well, thank you very much, both of you gentlemen, for this so provoking discussion. And I think that frank and open discussion has always been a strength of the transatlantic community, right? And this was one of the example trying to understand what is Germany about. And rightly so, I was thinking about that while you were speaking, that well, this is also our opportunity while the Germany is transforming, bringing closer the mindset, the perception of Germany to the Baltic states, and to sell our narrative to the Germany. And hopefully, in cooperation with you, in cooperation with Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung and other stakeholders here in Baltic states and Germany, we will do that. So once again, thank you. Thank you for participating, and please join me for a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, and please, snacks and coffee over there.